We've got an incredible panel of people here. So I'm Keith. I'm CEO of Trialport. We help people navigate clinical trials. It's something that for me was an idea 3 years ago when I got a diagnosis of prostate cancer, which turned out to be a false diagnosis, thank God. But I had this idea, and for those who are old enough, if you build it, they will come, is what I had this dream. But it was, if you build it right, they will come. And so 3 years ago, I had this idea that clinical trials are still not right in terms of how we engage people, because if it was, we wouldn't be sitting here now. Every trial would be filled. We wouldn't have any issues. So we set out on this journey to start to build out a platform rather than just looking at, do I fit the trial? It's, does the trial fit me? So looking at this from the behavioral way in which people engage. And in this 3-year journey, I've met the most incredible people. Some of them are sitting here now. Others are part of our team. An incredible group of people who have shaped the way in which we've built out this platform and continue to do so. Just over a year ago, we sat in Boston. We mapped out what the platform would be. And I sat with my 2 founding technologists, both of which combined age still less than me, which is crazy. And that became a reality. And then we stepped into the next phase. We needed to start understand how the industry would engage. And that's where Jeff came along. Jeff and I have worked together for 15 years. He was on the dark side and has come to the light. And then I had a very, not fortunate, but engineered encounter with Charlene, something that I'd wanted for a while because of what Global Genes do. And we sat down at Bio this time last year, and we spoke about what a hub would look like. So rather than just building another platform that sits on an island in the middle of nowhere and we hope people find it, our idea was to always embed, be where people go. And so with Charlene and the amazing team at Global Genes, we set out to build this hub. And that hub has now started to communicate into a number of different community groups. But it was developed within the rare space for the rare community. And with that has come well over 100,000 people now using the platform. People going on to clinical trials that had not known these trials existed. Perfect example with Ehlers-Danlos. We went live. 6 weeks later, 51 people had now found clinical trials. For one study, 19 had gone to one trial, 15 had screened, 8 were now enrolled on a study that they didn't know existed before. I've got a very clever tech team who have done, and they can bore you to death on condition clustering, semantic search. But this all came down to making a platform that was human and continues to develop in that way. And the latest part of this release is a new domain that we call readifit. How ready am I for a clinical trial? Not to go in, but to see this through to the end. And so to help people understand that. But I couldn't do it without the amazing people that are sitting here and the many hundreds more that I've spoken to and consulted on what we do. I'm going to hand over to Charlene now because these are the real heroes of Rare.
Thank you, Keith. Can y'all hear me? Okay, good. I'm Charlene Sunrigby. I'm the CEO of Global Genes. We are a patient advocacy and research organization that works across the more than 10,000 rare diseases. I'm also the mom of a patient with an ultra-rare neurodevelopmental disorder. And so I came into patient advocacy first being a parent and then realizing how hard it was to start an advocacy organization, kickstart research, and I became very passionate about this idea that we need to make it easier across rare diseases. So really lovely to see so many of you here tonight. I wanted to start out by introducing our panel, or actually asking our panelists to introduce themselves. So I'll hand the microphone to Connie first.
Thank you so much. I first of all want to say thank you to each and every one of you that made the time and are taking the time to be here tonight. I am Connie Lee Montgomery. I call myself an epic global patient advocate. Yes, I've traveled all over the world sharing my story and absolutely love to do it. I live with 2 rare disorders, rare factor 7 deficiency and pemphigus vulgaris, and 3 chronic conditions, hypertension, diabetes, and chronic kidney disease. The reason I'm here tonight is because I want each and every one of you to remember me, remember my story, and when you go back to your spaces and your offices to do your work, remember that you're working with human beings, and each one of those human beings come with their own complex care needs and their own dynamic backgrounds and their own issues. However, that's what makes us all special. Talk soon.
Thanks, Connie. Brioni.
Hi everyone, my name's Bryony. I am living with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and also work at the Ehlers-Danlos Society in the partnerships department.
Hi, my name is Joanna. I'm a biochemist. I work in a clinical pathology lab and also in a clinical trial center in the public hospital. And here I'm representing patients with the PBC. I'm the board of a patient advocacy group in Portugal, and I also have this disease as PBC. Thank you.
So my first question is about how you look for and evaluate research studies as well as clinical trials. And maybe I'll ask Joanna to first.
For PBC, we have not many clinical trials, and we have some clinical trials. But what we are looking is that clinical trials can just be more like engage patients at the beginning of the trials. And what we're looking for is not only the trials that want to get like the clinical aspects of the disease, but also the clinical trials must look at how the patient journey or how the quality of life of patients with the disease that is in the clinical trials, how they can just address those aspects of life.
Thank you. Connie, what about you? How do you look?
Well, first, I have to tell you a little bit about my story before I go into how I look for clinical trials. I am Connie Lee Montgomery, as I stated earlier, but I'm from South Carolina. Can't you hear that southern drawl? But I'm also Gullah Geechee. And being Gullah Geechee, I was reared not to trust Western medicine. My mother told me, be careful, just avoid that, because they don't really care about us anyway. If you want to use something, you're going to have to use the home remedies and the medical practices that they've used with the ancestors for years, not to go out and use Western medicine. So, when I was first presented with some of the illnesses, I was in my mid-30s because for many years, after being desperate, having menses that last half a month, having bruising, having nosebleeds that last 10 to 15 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week, we needed some help. So going against cultural upbringing and norms, my mother and I tried to seek care. And they told us we were making it up. This wasn't happening. It's a lie. And that further reinforced what mother believed, which was you don't trust Western medicine. So she had a saying. I'm sure some of you may have heard it. What happens in the family, you got it. And I kept it that way for a number of years. When I finally decided I wanted to be a healthcare professional, to change that, to change how people were treated, I was absolutely terrified to go and tell mother I wanted to be an occupational therapist. But I did it. And she asked me, why? Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to work in Western medicine, some place where people don't care about people like us? And I said to her, maybe I could be a difference maker, Mama. Maybe I could be somebody that makes a difference in healthcare. But I was in my mid-30s after a car accident, avoiding some teenagers that were playing around who swerved into my lane, and I swerved out of the way and landed in a canal ditch. My mid-30s, when I got a proper diagnosis of factor VII deficiency and pemphigus vulgaris and the other 3 chronic conditions. Now, I think my journey in healthcare has led me on the trajectory I'm on, but it has played a vital role in me not even wanting to take part in clinical trials and research until I realized that's where the help was. So when I look out at this room, I see helpers, I see healers. Yeah, you're researchers, you're scientists, you're site managers. Some of you guys may with biotech, pharma, but what you are to me, you're difference makers. So I started looking for clinical trials, but by the time I started looking for them, I had too many comorbidities and was too far gone. So my job is now, as long as I live, to tell everybody I can about humane, respectful, compassionate research and clinical trials, because maybe that'll make a difference in their life. Maybe their lives will be extended. Because at this point, I'm 55 years old. I have no living mother, no living father, no living maternal or paternal grandparents, and all 11 of my aunts and uncles are deceased. So believe me, you all do make a difference.
Connie, I think that that is such a statement around the potential and promise around medicines and figuring out how to identify the patients early enough and get them into the right trials and also get them the right medications after approval. So thank you for sharing that. Brioni, I know that the EDS landscape is still early in terms of clinical trials, but can you talk about how you identify and research studies and evaluate them, and also clinical trials? And actually, since Connie was able to share her diagnostic journey, can you talk a little bit about your diagnostic journey as well?
Yeah, definitely. So my diagnostic journey to me felt long, but was actually quite short compared to some others. I mean, there were signs from a newborn, but I'd say the kind of when we started investigating was when I was about 6 years old. I got diagnosed when I was 22. When I got diagnosed, the one thing I remember was so many people said to me, wow, you're so lucky that you've been diagnosed so young, because it can take on average 22 years to diagnose someone. So I had a journey that was a little bit easier than others, but still felt incredibly long. And I remember when I found out that I had this condition, and I'd obviously never heard of it before, all I was hearing was, well, there's no treatment options out there. There's no drugs you can take, just try and manage it as best you can. And I was just kind of thrown out into the world to look things up online and try and figure it out myself. Obviously now I work at the Ehlers-Danlos Society, so I kind of have a little bit more knowledge there on what's going on behind the scenes with clinical trials. We do have an active trial for vascular EDS, so not the type that I have. But it's only really been since connecting with Keith and kind of opening us up to this world and what is out there. And even as a patient group, we weren't aware of a lot of the research studies that were out there that our community could be a part of. So it's been really amazing to see. And even though there's not a lot for them to be involved in at this stage, they are so eager, our community, to be a part of it. I mean, we get messages about it all the time, and there was such a need for it. We actually started doing a lot of it in-house ourselves. So we have our own biobank, we have our own registry, we do a lot of internal studies. But yeah, now we just really want to try and spark some interest with pharma and get some more treatment options available.
Thank you for sharing that, Brioni. Joanna, can you talk about your diagnostic experience and some of the challenges in your disease with getting to a diagnosis? And then how do you think about the clinical trial process in terms of identifying trials and evaluating them?
I think I was very lucky with my diagnosis. My symptoms were very intense. They started really quick, difficult at first because I didn't know about PBC. So the first symptom I had was like intense fatigue, and each fatigue is like very specific. You can be tired for any reason. But the first thing I looked for was for a dermatologist because I was very itching and like what's happening. And when the dermatologist just couldn't find out anything, I had my lab tests, and so everything was just super high, very bad. My liver was not in a very good condition. But I was lucky enough because from my worst symptoms until I got diagnosed was like 6 months. And I know that most patients take years for a diagnosis because all the symptoms are not valuable when they go to the doctors. So I was very lucky with my diagnosis. It was very fast. And when I started the treatment, the disease was under control. So I was lucky. Sorry, it's yours.
Oh, that's great. I know I've been asking compound questions. We have two people who have a lot of jet lag on our panel, and so I'm impressed that they're still standing or at least sitting upright. But so my second question was around how do you identify clinical trials and evaluate them?
So clinical trials, I think most of them are presented to us from our doctors. Sometimes it's very difficult, or the information is not very clear. And if you can go and I have a disease, I don't know anything about that. And if I go and search for a clinical trial and find something like trialport, it's much easier because it's easier to understand and to know what you are expected to do if you can go to a clinical trial. So I think the challenge here is if you can go in a clinical trial and to know what that means to you and how is that going to impact your life.
That's great. Thank you. Brianne, can you talk a little bit about how clinical trials, because I think that one of the challenges for patients is participating in clinical trials. And, we've had some of the first clinical trials in my daughter's disorder in, the last year, and realizing that patients are going to need to spend a lot of time, like weeks for gene therapies, weeks at clinical sites, and have long visits. And some of that is necessary because of the data that needs to be collected. But do you have thoughts about how we can make trials more patient-centric and really take patient needs into consideration in terms of the design?
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously including the patient groups in the conversations from the start is really, really important. I think there's a lack of trust from the communities in the rare space because there's a sense of abandonment almost because of the lack of treatment options and the lack of understanding about these conditions. So really working on that from the start. But in terms of the kind of design of the trial, I think something that's really important to consider from that starting point is actually almost educating the patient groups on what a clinical trial looks like. I've spoken to so many different nonprofits and patient groups who don't understand the landscape or what goes into a clinical trial. And it's really hard. We want to be there and we want to support you. And, there's so much we can do for you in terms of that patient engagement and making sure you understand what our community needs, but we don't always understand what you need and what's important to you in this and how it plays out. Who do we need to talk to? How long is it going to take? All those small things. So I think it's really important for you guys to almost teach us and help us learn along the way, because the more we know, the more we can also help and give back to you to make sure it's kind of mutually beneficial.
Wonderful. It's not just the science, right? And it's meeting patients where they are, and bringing the whole community along. So Connie, I'm going to ask you to close us out. And what are your thoughts on patient-centered, how we can be more patient-centered in terms of research studies and clinical trials?
I think from the start, it absolutely has to be whole person-centered care. And what I mean, you have to make certain that you have places and things in place because it's been co-created, like Brianne stated, from the outset with the patients or the patient organizations. That's number one. You have to build trust and use the trusted messengers that are already located in those communities to bring the message to the individuals and the other persons in those communities. You have to do that. And if at all possible, if your company or your organization can show up in those communities, be at their community fairs, be at their festivals, get involved, sponsor their Little League baseball teams, let them see your name already associated with that community long before you need an individual or a warm body for your clinical trial, right? Because we want to build trust with the community and with the individuals. So be seen in those communities. Another thing I would say is recognize that people are complex beings. I just named that I've got 2 rare diseases and 3 chronic disease states. But at one time I had that, plus I was taking care of 3 family members, our loved ones, at the exact same time. So understand that even when we're designing these trials, that it has to fit into real people's lives and be on their schedules. And don't just ask questions that you don't already have a strategic answer for. If it's going to be a travel issue, make certain that you have a travel component already situated for the trial site. And then ask the patients and the participants potentially what it is they need and what it is they want for compensation. Don't always come into the room with the answer, but ask those individuals what is going to be most beneficial for you. Is that all right? Thank you.
Actually, Keith, let me just say that a lot of great ideas were shared tonight. I wanted to make you aware that our corporate alliance at Global Genes and our Global Advocacy Alliance put together a white paper on early and often, which is how to engage patient advocacy groups and patients earlier in the process of drug development. And that is now being submitted as a peer-reviewed article. So please download it from our website.
Thank you. And I just want to thank everyone for sharing. For me, there were a couple of things that came out, something that you said, Charlene, in terms of the time you're going to spend in clinic. Just to put something in perspective, one of the people I work with, his son has Duchenne's. He would have done anything to get his son. In fact, he went through walls to get his son into a study. Several months in, he started to wane because he didn't know how much would be involved, but he stuck with it. But 7,200 miles later, to and from the clinic, that's what it means to these families. And I think the more we can do, not to rip up the script, but look at how because you can't rip up the script, look at how we can adapt, gets us to a place where we have common ground for pharma, common ground for the people living with conditions, and the communities that support them. And I ask you just two last things, or three things. One, if you'd like to engage with us as trialport as an advocacy group, sponsor, fine, but advocacy group, come and speak to us. We'd love to help your community understand clinical trials. If you want to see what our amazing tech team have done, they've set up demos there, which is about readiness for a trial and being able to see into the future as to whether or not you're right. But most importantly, talk to someone you haven't met before, share ideas, because I hear so many stories from so many different groups, the same challenges, the same issues coming up, and sometimes others have already solved them. The PBC community are ahead of where the EDS community are in some of their development. So spend some time talking to everyone and play some ping pong. Have a good night, guys.